I used to believe in love, the kind that sweeps you off your feet, the kind that feels like home. I wanted to believe that's what I had with Victor. But love was never what he wanted. He believed in something else entirely. Money, power, control. And I was just the means to an end. It took me longer than I'd like to admit, but I finally saw it. The charm, the soft words, the thoughtful gestures, they had all been a well-crafted illusion, and I had fallen for it. Hard. The shift happened gradually, so subtly that I ignored the signs at first. The way he'd glance past me when I spoke, how his warmth turned to indifference, then to something colder. At night, lying next to him, I'd replay moments in my head, searching for the exact moment I had lost him, until I realized I never truly had him to begin with. Victor hadn't married me for love. He had married me for what was in my name. And now, after years of waiting, he was preparing for his grand finale, the perfect exit, wrapped in legal paperwork and dollar signs. I knew about his plan long before he even whispered it to a lawyer. He thought he was careful, discreet. He underestimated me. I saw the changes in his spending, the new accounts he thought I wouldn't notice. He was preparing for divorce, believing he'd walk away with half of everything I had built. He thought he had won before the first paper was even signed. He thought I was clueless. But Victor forgot one crucial thing. I am always 10 steps ahead. While he was planning his escape, I was planning something far more satisfying. And when the time came, he wouldn't just lose the game. He'd lose everything. I played my part well. Too well, maybe. I let him believe I was the oblivious, doting wife, too caught up in my own world to notice his scheming. I smiled when he needed me to, laughed at his empty words, and pretended not to hear the hushed phone calls. I let him think he was winning. It was almost entertaining, watching him act as though he had outmaneuvered me. He had no idea that every move he made was exactly what I had anticipated. There were nights I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing, knowing he was dreaming of a life without me, a life where he was free, wealthy, victorious. I wondered if he ever felt even the slightest twinge of guilt, if he ever looked at me and remembered the woman he had once promised to cherish. But deep down, I already knew the answer. Victor didn't feel guilt. He didn't feel anything unless it benefited him. His love was conditional, his loyalty non-existent. The moment I was no longer useful, I became disposable. That was my turning point. The night I accepted the truth, the night I let go of the fantasy I had clung to for too long, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry over him. I wasn't going to beg or fight or break. No, that would be too easy. Victor wanted to strip me of my power, my dignity, my wealth. But I was never going to let that happen. I would beat him at his own game. And unlike him, I wasn't careless. I wasn't arrogant. I would make sure there was nothing left for him to take. So I got to work. Quietly, methodically. While he was securing his future, I was erasing mine, at least on paper. I moved assets, closed accounts, signed papers that left me, legally, with nothing. I ensured that by the time he made his move, there would be no fortune waiting for him. Just the illusion of one, slipping through his fingers like smoke. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. No threats, no confrontations, no desperate attempts to make him see the truth. Just quiet, calculated destruction. Every step was executed flawlessly, every detail planned down to the last signature. By the time Victor was ready to make his grand move, I had already dismantled the empire he thought he was about to claim. It was almost poetic. I remember the night before he filed for divorce. He came home late, reeking of expensive whiskey and self-satisfaction. He barely looked at me as he loosened his tie, his mind already lost in the fantasy of his future life, one without me, but with my money. I watched him from across the room, my face unreadable, my hands steady. If only he knew. If only he had the slightest clue that his victory had already been stolen from him. But he didn't. He truly believed he had won. The next morning, he kissed my cheek absent-mindedly, out of habit, not affection, and walked out the door, thinking it was the last time he'd do so as my husband. I watched from the window as he got into his car, probably on his way to his lawyer's office, no doubt already celebrating in his mind. Poor Victor. So confident, so sure of himself. He had no idea he was walking into his own ruin. As I turned away from the window, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. I had spent so long tangled in his web, suffocating under the weight of his manipulation. But now I was free. And he? He was about to find out what it felt like to lose everything. The day Victor walked into that lawyer's office, he thought he was stepping into his future, a future built on my wealth, my effort, my name. I imagine he sat back in his chair, wearing that smug, self-assured grin, tapping his fingers against the polished wood of the desk while his attorney walked him through the process. He probably thought about how easy it all had been, how he had played the game so perfectly. But, oh, Victor, you never were as clever as you believed. I wasn't there when it happened, but I can picture the moment perfectly. The instant his world shifted, the precise second his illusion shattered. He must have leaned forward when the papers were laid out, scanning them quickly, expecting to see numbers that validated all his efforts. Instead, his brow furrowed, his grin faded, his fingers clenched the documents just a little tighter. And then, confusion, panic, realization. There was nothing. The accounts he had been counting on, emptied. The properties he assumed were his to claim, gone. The investments, the holdings, the savings, all legally transferred away months ago, with no path back to him. He had spent years planning for this moment, only to find that the fortune he believed was his for the taking had disappeared like a mirage in the desert. I almost wish I could have seen his face when he finally asked the question, the one that must have clawed its way out of his tightening throat, heavy with disbelief and rage. Where's the money? Oh, how I would have loved to watch as the reality set in, as the weight of his failure pressed down on him. But I didn't need to be there to enjoy it. Because when Victor lost control, when his voice rose in frustration and his lawyer hesitated to answer, I was exactly where I wanted to be, sitting at home, sipping a glass of wine, waiting for the inevitable. It didn't take long for the phone to ring. I had been expecting it. I let it buzz once, twice, before casually picking it up, as if I hadn't been anticipating this exact moment for months. Elena, he spat my name like a curse, his voice tight with barely contained rage. Where is it? I swirled my wine, watching the deep red liquid catch the light. Where is what, darling? I asked, keeping my tone light, effortless, as if we were discussing dinner plans. Don't play games with me, he snapped. The money, the investments, the property. My lawyers just went through the records, and it's all... He cut himself off, probably trying to control his temper. You moved everything. I let a slow smile spread across my lips. There it is, I thought. The unraveling. The precise moment where all of his arrogance, all of his certainty, crumbled into dust. That's odd, I mused, taking a deliberate sip of my wine. Everything was there last time I checked. A sharp breath on the other end. I could picture him now, his jaw clenched, his hands tightening into fists, his entire body thrumming with impotent fury. This wasn't how things were supposed to go for him. No, in his mind, I was supposed to be the one caught off guard. I was supposed to be crying, begging, scrambling to protect what was mine. Instead, he was the one left grasping at nothing. Elena, he growled, lower now, a desperate attempt to regain control. Where is the money? I leaned back into my chair, savoring the moment. Oh, Victor, I thought. You should have paid more attention to the woman you married. I let the silence stretch, just long enough for him to feel it. The weight of uncertainty. The gnawing realization that he had no control over this, no leverage, no way to undo what had already been done. Then finally, I exhaled a soft, amused breath. Oh, Victor, I murmured, letting his name drip from my lips like honey laced with venom. You really thought I'd just sit back and let you take everything? That I'd be so blind, so trusting, that I wouldn't notice what you were planning? I clicked my tongue in mock disappointment. You always did underestimate me. I heard him shift on the other end of the line, his breath coming faster now. He was pacing, I imagined, running a hand through his hair, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. He wasn't used to losing. Not like this. Not completely. This isn't over, he finally bit out, his voice laced with desperation. You think you've won? You think you can just erase everything and leave me with nothing? I smiled, though he couldn't see it. Erase? No, I hadn't erased anything. I had simply moved things where he could never reach them. Offshore trusts, charities, family accounts with ironclad protections. Every single asset stripped from my name with perfect legal precision. I stood, walking slowly to the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. That's the thing, Victor, I said, voice steady, measured. There's nothing left for you to fight for. No loopholes, no hidden accounts, no settlement waiting at the end of this. You walked into this divorce expecting half of my fortune. I let my words hang for a beat, then softly, but I don't have a fortune anymore. The silence on the other end was delicious, heavy, suffocating. Then, finally, a single word, spoken so low I almost didn't hear it. No. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. Yes. And then, for the first time in years, I hung up first. I expected another call, maybe an angry voicemail, some desperate attempt to regain control, to pull me back into his game. But for the first time in our marriage, Victor was silent. No late-night messages, no lawyers knocking at my door, just silence. And silence, I knew, was far more dangerous than rage. It meant he was thinking, plotting, searching for any crack in the foundation of what I had built. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I imagined the days that followed, the way he must have torn through the financial records, poring over bank statements, desperate to find something, anything, to prove this was just a mistake. He had always believed himself untouchable, too smart, too careful to be outplayed. But this wasn't a mistake. This was meticulous. This was inevitable. When he finally did reach out again, it wasn't through calls or messages. No, Victor was more strategic than that. Instead, it was his lawyer who sent the request, a formal inquiry into my financial transfers. A thinly veiled threat wrapped in legal jargon, demanding answers. I read the document over coffee, unimpressed. He wanted to scare me, to make me second-guess myself. But there was nothing to question. Every move I had made was legal, precise, and untouchable. Still, I couldn't resist a little flourish. I signed my response with a single line beneath my lawyer's official statement. 5 words, handwritten in ink. You never married a fool. I imagined the moment he read my note. How his jaw must have tightened, his grip on the paper just a little too firm. Victor always prided himself on control, of his emotions, of his surroundings, of me. But now he had nothing to hold on to. No assets, no leverage, no victory. Just the cold realization that he had been played at his own game. Days passed and I waited. Not out of fear, but anticipation. I knew he wouldn't let this go. He would search for an opening, a way to manipulate the system, to manipulate me. And when he finally showed up at my doorstep, I wasn't surprised. He didn't knock. Of course he didn't. Instead, he stood outside, hands shoved into his pockets, eyes dark with something between fury and disbelief. For a moment, we just stared at each other. No words, no pretense. Then, finally, he spoke. You really think this is over? His voice was low, steady, but I could hear the strain beneath it, the frustration of a man who had lost control. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, keeping my expression neutral. I don't think, Victor. I know. A humorless chuckle. He shook his head, glancing away as if searching for an explanation that made sense. You really moved everything, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then his eyes locked onto mine again, sharp, searching. Why? You had everything. You didn't need to. To protect myself? I cut him off, arching a brow. To make sure you didn't walk away with something you never earned? I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to let the weight of my words sink in. Victor, you spent years treating me like an asset, something to be claimed, controlled. Did you really think I wouldn't see it coming? His lips pressed into a thin line. He wanted to argue. He wanted to find a way to twist the narrative in his favor. But we both knew there was nothing left to say. Victor exhaled sharply, dragging a hand through his hair, a habit he had when things weren't going his way. I had seen that exact motion before, during business deals gone wrong, intense arguments where he realized he was losing ground. But this wasn't a negotiation. There was no counteroffer, no compromise. He had lost. Completely. You don't get it, he finally said, voice tight with frustration. You think you won, but this isn't winning, Elena. This is you being petty, vindictive. I laughed, soft and slow. Vindictive? I tilted my head, studying him. You married me for my money, spent years pretending, lying, manipulating, and I'm the vindictive one? His jaw clenched, but I wasn't finished. You were never in this for love, Victor. You wanted security, a shortcut to the life you thought you deserved. And when you decided you were done with me, you expected to walk away with half of everything I built. I took a step forward, meeting his gaze without a trace of hesitation. But tell me, why should I have let you? The silence that followed was thick, heavy, charged with everything left unsaid. He had no answer, because deep down he knew. Knew that if the roles were reversed, he wouldn't have hesitated to do the same. Knew that for the first time in his life, he had underestimated someone who refused to be his pawn. I let that realization settle before delivering the final blow. I leaned in just enough so he could hear every word, slow and deliberate. Oh, Victor, I whispered, my lips curling into a smirk. You married me for money. Too bad you never married someone stupid. His face darkened, his hands balling into fists at his sides, but he didn't say another word. He just turned and walked away, his movements stiff, controlled, because he knew I was right. And as I watched him disappear down the street, a strange sense of satisfaction settled over me. Not just because I had won, but because, for the first time in years, I was finally free. Word spread faster than I expected. It started in whispers, subtle, knowing looks at parties, hushed conversations behind closed doors. Then came the questions, the speculation. People always love a scandal, especially when it involves a man like Victor, polished, confident, untouchable. Or at least, that's what he used to be. I didn't have to tell anyone what happened. They figured it out on their own. His empty accounts, his failed attempts to reclaim what was never his, the sudden loss of status that followed him like a shadow. The friends he once bragged to about his inevitable fortune, they saw through him now. His business associates, the ones who respected him for his supposed intelligence, they began to question just how smart he really was. And then there was the woman. Because, of course, there was another woman. There always is. Maybe she was younger. Maybe she had been promised the same dreams he once sold to me. I wonder how she felt when she realized the man she thought she had won was, in fact, a fraud. When she discovered the expensive dinners, the luxury vacations, the future she imagined, all of it had been built on the assumption that I would remain naive, unprepared. But I wasn't. And now, neither was she. She left him naturally, disappeared just as quickly as she had arrived. And suddenly, Victor wasn't just a man without money. He was a man without power, without status, without even the illusion of control. Victor tried to fight back. Of course he did. Men like him don't know how to lose gracefully. He hired new lawyers, desperate to challenge the transfers, to find a loophole, a mistake, anything that would give him a way back in. But there was nothing. Every document had been checked, double-checked, sealed so tightly that even the best legal minds couldn't unravel them. And so, he did what men like him do when the world stops bending to their will. He blamed me. I heard about the things he said. That I was a liar, a thief, that I had manipulated the system, twisted the law to my advantage. As if protecting what was mine, ensuring that he walked away with nothing, was some great betrayal. As if his own actions, years of deceit, of calculated moves to strip me of everything, hadn't been the real crime. I didn't respond. There was no need. Let him rage. Let him curse my name in rooms full of people who had already made up their minds about him. The truth was evident in the way his phone calls stopped being returned, the way invitations dried up, the way the respect he once commanded turned into quiet pity. He was losing, and worse, he was losing publicly. There's a special kind of humiliation that comes with being exposed, not just as a failure, but as a man who thought he was invincible and found out too late that he wasn't. And then, when the legal battles ended, when he had exhausted every desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage, there was nothing left but the bills. His high-powered lawyers didn't work for free. His luxurious lifestyle had been built on an expectation of money that would never come. One by one, his possessions disappeared, sold off, liquidated, gone. The sports car, the designer suits, the sleek apartment he kept on the side for nights he didn't come home. All of it, gone. The last time I saw Victor, he wasn't the man I used to know. The arrogance had been stripped away, the polished confidence reduced to something hollow, fragile. He stood in the doorway of what used to be our home, a single suitcase at his feet, everything he had left in the world. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Instead, I handed him an envelope. He eyed it warily before snatching it from my hand, probably expecting some final concession, a settlement, a check, something to soften the fall. But as he unfolded the paper inside, his face twisted in disbelief. It was a printed statement. His net worth. It was 0. I watched the realization settle, the weight of it pressing down on him like gravity itself. He looked up at me then, searching for something. Remorse, guilt, maybe even kindness. But I felt nothing for him. No anger, no pity. Just the quiet certainty that this was exactly how things were meant to end. Good luck, Victor. I smiled, slow and measured. You're going to need it. He didn't say a word. He just turned, picked up his suitcase, and walked away. And I closed the door behind him, locking it for the last time. It's strange how quickly life moves on once you cut out the rot. For years, Victor had been this looming presence, a weight I didn't even realize I was carrying until he was gone. And now my world felt lighter, clearer. I no longer woke up bracing for another fight, another betrayal disguised as affection. I no longer had to calculate my words, anticipate his moods, or pretend to be the woman he once manipulated so easily. For the first time in a long time, I was free. I didn't look back, not once. While Victor spent his days scrambling, trying to repair the damage of his own making, I was building something new, quietly, thoughtfully. I had never been reckless with money the way he was, had never needed validation through status or excess. Wealth had never defined me. It was simply a tool. And now, without someone leeching from my every success, I had the space to use it the way I wanted. I started small. An investment here, a project there. I knew better than to flaunt my recovery. I had no interest in proving anything to anyone. But behind the scenes, I was rebuilding, not just my finances, but my life. And Victor? Well, Victor was learning a lesson he never thought he'd have to. I never bothered to check up on Victor, but the world has a way of delivering certain truths right to your doorstep. His downfall became public knowledge before I even had to wonder. People love a good story, and his was the kind they whispered about at dinner parties and laughed about over drinks, the once untouchable, powerful Victor, reduced to nothing. I heard things, of course, how he bounced between rented apartments, struggling to hold on to the lifestyle he could no longer afford. How the friends who used to sing his praises conveniently forgot his name when he needed their help. How potential business partners hesitated to return his calls, knowing his reputation as a man who lost everything. Even the women, especially the women, lost interest. Without the promise of wealth, he was just another man with nothing but stories of what used to be. The new girlfriend, the one he thought would be his fresh start, left him not long after the truth came out. Apparently, love doesn't stretch as far when there's no money to cushion the fall. I imagine it must have been humiliating for him, walking through the same city he once ruled, now overlooked, dismissed. The same doors that once opened easily now closed before he could step through. No power, no influence, no safety net, just a man left to face the consequences of his own choices. And the best part, I didn't have to do a thing. Victor tried to reach out once, a message, short, vague, the kind that left just enough room for interpretation, for manipulation. Elena, can we talk? I stared at the screen for a moment, my finger hovering over the notification. Once I might have felt something, curiosity, anger, even a flicker of nostalgia for the life we once pretended to have. But now? Now it was just another loose thread, one I had no intention of picking up. I deleted the message without reading the rest. And then, with the sun warming my skin and the sound of the waves lapping against the shore, I raised my glass to the sky and whispered, just to myself, best investment I ever made. Because I wasn't just free of Victor. I was free of the woman I used to be, the one who would have answered, who would have given him another chance to twist the story in his favor. That version of me was gone. And in her place, a woman who had reclaimed everything he thought he could take. Victor could keep his regrets. I had my future.